All right, so get ready because we're diving headfirst into the second term of the Trump administration.
Already making waves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And only 3 weeks in. We're talking Palestinians facing relocation,
Yeah.
like a mass exodus type situation.
Elon Musk shaking up the government,
That's always a recipe for excitement.
to say the least. And even whispers about Canada.
Canada.
Yeah, becoming part of the U.S.
Okay, now you've got my attention. So where are we getting all this from? What rabbit holes did you dive into this time?
Well, we've got news reports, legal analyses, even some pretty heated social media threads. We're talking a global mix of perspective.
Perfect for a deep dive.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in, shall we? This whole Gaza relocation thing has got to be the most, let's say, unexpected part of this whole scenario.
Yeah, unexpected is one way to put it.
So what exactly is Trump proposing and how are people reacting?
Okay, so picture this. Trump, standing next to Netanyahu, suggests relocating Palestinians from Gaza.
Relocating? To
Hey.
where?
He throws out Egypt, Jordan, maybe even further afield, and get this.
Wait, there's more.
He frames it as a chance to rebuild Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East.
Riviera.
Yeah, a haven for, and I quote, the world's people.
Okay, that's a bold vision to say the least. And a bit jarring considering the images we usually see from Gaza.
That's putting it mildly, and that's exactly why Palestinians are raising some serious red flags.
No kind of red flags.
They're drawing parallels to the 1948 displacement, the Nakba.
The what?
The Nakba.
Okay.
It means catastrophe in Arabic.
Ah, okay. So they see this proposal as like a repeat of that.
Basically, they see it as a continuation of that historical trauma.
Like stripping them of their homeland, their connection to the land and all that.
Exactly. It's not just about the physical displacement. It's about erasing their history, their culture, their identity.
Okay, yeah, that puts things in perspective. So this Nakba, it's a deeply rooted wound that's shaping how they're reacting to Trump's proposal.
Absolutely. To understand their reaction, you got to understand the weight of that history.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But let's be practical for a second. Even if Trump wanted to go through with this, wouldn't he need buy-in from those countries he's suggesting as relocation spots? I mean, you can't just ship millions of people to another country without their consent, right?
You'd think so, right. But both Egypt and Jordan have flat out rejected Trump's call to resettle Palestinians.
So they're like, nope, not happening.
Pretty much. They've made it crystal clear they want no part in this plan.
Okay, so we've got Palestinians vehemently opposed, potential host countries saying no way, and this whole plan seems to be teetering on, well, some pretty shaky legal ground. What are we talking about in terms of potential legal ramifications?
Well, forcibly transferring a population, that's a big no-no under international law.
No kidding.
We're talking potential violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which protects civilians during wartime. Some human rights groups are even calling it a form of ethnic cleansing.
Ethnic cleansing, that's a phrase that definitely sends chills down my spine. So we've got opposition on multiple fronts, Palestinians, neighboring countries, and even on legal grounds. But even if this relocation somehow happened, what's the plan for Gaza itself? What would the U.S. actually do with it?
Well, that's where things get even murkier. Trump has hinted at a U.S. takeover, but his statements are incredibly vague.
Vague? How so? Like, what's he actually saying?
It's like he's dancing around the specifics, and here's where it gets even more interesting. There seems to be a real disconnect between what Trump is saying and what his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is suggesting.
Way to disconnect. They're not on the same page about this.
Not at all. Rubio has talked about relocation as a temporary measure.
Like to rebuild and then move everyone back?
Yeah, something like that. But Trump's language suggests something much more permanent, almost like he's thinking about a long-term U.S. presence.
So you've got the people being displaced who are completely against it, the proposed host country saying hard pass, and even within the U.S. government, there's confusion about the end goal. This is getting more and more unsettling by the minute. But before we get completely lost in the Gaza scenario, let's switch gears and talk about DOGE. I gotta admit, when I first saw that acronym, I thought we were taking a detour into the world of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I get that Dogecoin is definitely having its moment.
Big time. But we're talking about something else entirely, right?
Right. In this case, DOGE stands for the Department of Government Efficiency.
Oh, okay. Government efficiency.
Trump's brainchild for tackling government spending.
And who better to lead the charge than Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Right. Talk about an interesting choice. What exactly is DOGE targeting, and what kind of impact are they having?
Well, their first major target has been USAID.
USAID, as in the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Yep, the one that provides humanitarian assistance and development aid globally.
The organization known for, helping people in times of crisis. Why target that?
It seems Trump and Musk see USIN as, how do I put this delicately, ripe for a cost-cutting extravaganza.
So they're like the poster child for government bloat in their eyes.
Basically, they're talking about streamlining operations, eliminating waste, bringing that Silicon Valley efficiency mindset to government aid.
Okay, I see where they're coming from, in theory at least. But I did read that Musk's DOGE team actually got their hands on some pretty sensitive financial data from the Treasury Department.
Yeah, that's been causing quite a stir.
It's definitely raising some red flags for me. We're talking about access to data on Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, tax refunds, the kind of information that makes you shudder to think about it falling into the wrong hands.
Yeah, not exactly the kind of information you want floating around unprotected.
So did they even have the authority to access that data in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's currently being battled out in court.
So DOGE is not only making waves by targeting USAID, but they're also wading into some murky legal waters with this whole data access thing.
Definitely a double whammy of controversy, to say the least.
Okay, so we've got Trump's plan for Gaza, which is, well, controversial at best. And we've got Elon Musk on his efficiency crusade, leaving a trail of data privacy concerns in his wake. What other global shockwaves are we looking at in this hypothetical second term?
Well, let's shift our focus to Trump's approach to foreign policy. It seems his America First mantra has been, shall we say, amplified, and some of his actions and statements are causing serious friction with some long-standing allies.
Like who?
Canada and the UK, for starters.
America First, amplified, huh? That sounds like a recipe for some diplomatic headaches, to put it mildly. Give me an example of what you're talking about.
But he's been making some, let's say, interesting remarks about Canada.
Interesting. How so?
He's suggesting that they'd be better off as the 51st U.S. state.
Canada is the 51st state.
Ugh.
Is he serious? I mean, I know Trump likes to throw out those curveballs, but that seems like it's coming from left field.
It's definitely raised some eyebrows, to say the least. And it's not just rhetoric. Either Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has actually acknowledged the seriousness of Trump's intentions.
Really? Like he thinks Trump might actually try to make a move on Canada.
It's hard to say for sure, but the fact that Trudeau is taking it seriously suggests that it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. And Canada is not the only one feeling the heat. The UK is also bracing for a turbulent relationship with the US.
What are their concerns? Are they worried about becoming the 52nd state too?
I doubt it. They're more concerned about the potential fallout from Trump's policies on trade, defense spending, and his whole approach to the war in Ukraine, for example.
Speaking of Ukraine, that's been a major point of global tension for years now. What's the situation looking like in this hypothetical future?
Well, Trump has signaled that he wants to negotiate an end to the war.
Negotiate an end to the war? Okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
On the surface, maybe not. But he's also hinted that he might do it without involving Kyiv directly.
Without Ukraine's input. That's a bold move, to say the least. What's Putin's stance on all this?
Well, Putin has also mentioned negotiations, but his actions on the ground paint a different picture. He's shown little willingness to compromise and seems determined to achieve his objectives militarily.
So we've got two leaders saying they want to talk, but their actions and underlying goals seem completely at odds. What are the experts saying about the chances of a negotiated settlement actually working?
A lot of them believe that Putin might be willing to meet with Trump just to further Russian interests.
So it's like a PR stunt for him.
Possibly. They're skeptical that he'd offer any real concessions, and that's where the danger lies.
What kind of danger?
Any agreement that favors Moscow would basically reward aggression, damage the credibility of the West, and set a dangerous precedent for international relations. It could embolden other authoritarian leaders to pull similar moves, thinking they can get away with it too.
Okay, so this hypothetical second term is shaping up to be a wild ride.
Yeah.
Potential displacement of Palestinians, Elon Musk wielding power over government agencies, strained relationships with key allies, and a risky gamble on negotiations with Putin. It's a lot to process.
It certainly is. And we've only just scratched the surface. Welcome back to our deep dive into a hypothetical second term for President Trump.
I feel like we need to take a collective deep breath after that last segment. It's mind-boggling to consider the sheer scale and complexity of these scenarios.
Definitely a lot to unpack. But that's why we're here, to break it down and explore the potential ramifications of these hypothetical events.
Well, I'm ready to dive back in. Let's revisit the potential relocation of Palestinians from Gaza. Setting aside the ethical and legal concerns for a moment, the logistics of such a move seem utterly daunting. Where would these millions of people actually go?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Trump mentioned Egypt and Jordan as possibilities, but they've already voiced their opposition. And beyond that, the infrastructure needed to support such a massive influx of people is staggering. We're talking housing, healthcare, education, jobs, the list goes on.
It's not as simple as just drawing lines on a map and saying, okay, everyone move here. We're talking about uprooting an entire population, scattering them across the globe, potentially tearing apart families and communities. The social and cultural impact alone would be immense.
Exactly. And then there's the question of what happens to their cultural heritage, their historical ties to the land. These aren't just abstract concepts. They're deeply intertwined with people's sense of identity, belonging, and history. Erasing that connection could have profound and lasting consequences.
It's hard to even fathom the human cost of such a move. We're talking about generations of trauma, displacement, and loss. It makes you wonder if those behind this proposal have truly considered the long-term implications.
That's a valid point. It seems the focus is on a quick fix, a dramatic reshaping of the region without full consideration for the human beings at the center of it all. And that's why this proposal has been met with such fierce opposition from human rights groups worldwide. They see it as a dangerous precedent that could embolden other countries to pursue similar policies, further undermining the already fragile framework of international law.
So it seems like Trump's vision for Gaza is facing pushback, not just on a practical level, but also on a deeply moral and ethical level. It's a scenario that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about power, displacement, and the legacy of historical injustices.
Indeed, it challenges our very understanding of human rights, self-determination, and the right to a homeland. It compels us to examine the complexities of history and how past traumas continue to shape the present.
Okay, after delving into that heavy topic, I need a mental break. Let's shift gears to something a little less weighty, like Elon Musk and his DOGE initiative. What's the general reaction been to his crusade to slash government spending?
Well, it's been a mixed bag, as you might expect. There are those who applaud his efforts to streamline bureaucracy and eliminate what they see as wasteful spending. They argue that the government has become too bloated and inefficient, and that DOGE is a much-needed corrective.
I can see that perspective. Everyone gets frustrated with red tape and pointless regulations at some point.
But there's also significant pushback, particularly from those who see DOGE as a threat to essential government services and programs. They worry that the focus on efficiency will come at the expense of effectiveness, leaving vulnerable populations behind.
Like with USAID, for example. Cutting funding to an organization that provides crucial humanitarian aid seems like it would have serious consequences for people who rely on their assistance.
Exactly. Critics argue that DOGE is taking an overly simplistic approach, prioritizing the bottom line without fully considering the broader impact of these cuts. They point out that many government programs, while they may appear inefficient on paper, actually play a vital role in supporting communities both domestically and internationally.
So it's a classic clash of ideologies. Those who prioritize the economic efficiency and fiscal responsibility versus those who believe in the importance of government intervention and a strong social safety net.
And the fact that DOGE is spearheaded by Elon Musk, a figure who evokes such strong opinions, further complicates the debate.
He's definitely not one to shy away from the spotlight. Some people see him as a visionary genius, while others view him as a reckless billionaire with too much influence.
Precisely. And those perceptions color how people view DOGE. His supporters see his involvement as a guarantee of innovation and effectiveness, while his detractors worry that it signals the increasing influence of unelected tech elites in government.
It seems like the DOGE saga is tapping into some deep-seated anxieties about the role of government, the growing influence of wealth and technology, and the future of governance in an increasingly complex world.
You hit the nail on the head. And then there's the controversy surrounding DOGE's access to sensitive Treasury data, which adds another layer of complexity. It raises serious concerns about transparency, accountability, and the potential for misuse of personal information.
Okay, so we've got the potential displacement of Palestinians, the rise of DOGE and its controversial data access, and I'm starting to feel like we need a whole separate deep dive just to unpack the ethical and legal implications of all this.
I agree, there's a lot to grapple with. But remember, we're exploring a world where Trump's America First approach to foreign policy has been amplified. And as we've seen, that's causing some serious friction with longstanding allies like Canada and the UK.
Right, I'd almost forgotten about that amidst all the other chaos. And it sounds like Canada is bearing the brunt of this intensified America First policy.
Absolutely. Trump's suggestion that Canada would be better off as a U.S. state has sent shockwaves through the Canadian political establishment. They're grappling with the implications of such a bold statement from their powerful neighbor.
I mean, it's one thing to engage in tough negotiations on trade or immigration, but openly suggesting the annexation of a sovereign nation is a whole other level of aggression.
And while it's unclear whether Trump is genuinely serious about this or if it's just a strategic power play, it's undoubtedly created a sense of unease among Canadians. They're worried about the potential economic fallout, the erosion of their national identity, and the threat to their sovereignty in the face of such pressure from the U.S.
And what about the UK? What are their main concerns in this hypothetical scenario?
Well, they're also treading carefully, trying to navigate a relationship with the U.S. president who seems determined to reshape the global order according to his own vision. They're particularly worried about Trump's protectionist trade policies, his demands for increased defense spending, and his willingness to undermine international institutions like NATO.
So it seems like Trump's America First mantra has morphed into America alone. He's alienating allies, emboldening adversaries, and creating a climate of instability and unpredictability on the world stage.
That's a pretty apt assessment, and the potential consequences of this approach are far-reaching. A weakened Western alliance could embolden countries like Russia and China to pursue more aggressive foreign policies, potentially leading to regional conflicts or even a global power struggle.
But it's like a domino effect, with each of these seemingly isolated events potentially triggering a cascade of consequences that could ripple across the globe. We're talking about a fundamental shift in the balance of power, with unpredictable and potentially dangerous outcomes.
Precisely. And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling and so unsettling. We're not just theorizing about abstract political concepts. We're exploring real-world events that could have a profound impact on billions of people around the world.
It's starting to feel less like a deep dive and more like a descent into a global what-if machine, with each scenario more mind-boggling than the last.
I understand the sentiment, but remember, exploring these hypothetical scenarios can help us better understand the complexities of the world we live in and the potential consequences of the choices our leaders make.
Okay, deep breaths, everyone. We're heading into the final part of this deep dive, and I have a feeling it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Hang on tight. In part 3, we'll grapple with the question of what this all means for the future. Can the international community weather these hypothetical storms, or are we headed for a period of prolonged instability and conflict?
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into President Trump's hypothetical second term.
We've covered a lot, haven't we?
We have, from a potential relocation of Palestinians from Gaza
To the rise of DOGE.
and all those escalating tensions with Canada and the UK. It's a lot to take in.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the potential consequences. It feels like we've jumped into some kind of global choose-your-own-adventure story, and every path leads to some pretty unsettling outcomes.
I hear you. But maybe we can step back for a second.
Okay,
And try to, distill some key insights from this hypothetical world.
okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Well, one thing that's crystal clear is that this hypothetical second term is a serious escalation of Trump's America First agenda.
We're not just talking about talk anymore.
Hmm.
We're talking about actions with the potential to completely reshape the global landscape.
Right.
The Gaza relocation plan is a perfect example. It's hard to imagine a more dramatic illustration of that America First worldview in action.
It's not just about putting American interests above all else either.
But there's more to it.
It's about doing so in a way that seems to disregard international norms and legal frameworks.
So basically throwing out the rule book.
Kind of.
Okay.
It signals a willingness to act alone.
Unilaterally.
Yeah, to pursue American interests, even if it means alienating allies.
Or undermining institutions.
Right. Or even destabilizing entire regions.
And this disregard for norms, it's not just in foreign policy, is it? We see the same thing happening domestically with DOGE.
That's true. It's like Trump is creating his own set of rules, bypassing those traditional checks and balances.
And concentrating power in the hands of a select few.
Exactly. Which raises some big questions about governance, transparency, and accountability.
It's almost like he's creating this parallel system of power, like a shadow government.
With tech billionaires and political outsiders who answer only to him.
Yeah. And that's a pretty unsettling thought, considering the potential for unchecked influence and the erosion of democratic processes.
It definitely raises concerns about the future of governance and how decisions are made. When you prioritize loyalty and efficiency above everything else.
Above experience and accountability.
Right. You end up with a system that can be easily abused and makes decisions that prioritize the short term over the long term.
And that brings us back to those global implications we've been talking about. Trump's America First approach seems to be less about just prioritizing American interests.
And more about pursuing those interests in a way that disrupts the existing world order.
He's alienating allies, undermining agreements, and basically challenging the way diplomacy and conflict resolution have worked for decades.
And that creates a vacuum of leadership in this climate of uncertainty that could have major consequences.
We talked about the possibility of emboldening adversaries like Russia and China. But what about global cooperation in general? Issues like climate change, pandemics, those require everyone to work together.
They do. Can we really tackle these huge challenges when every country is just looking out for themselves?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So what does all of this mean for the future? Are we headed for a world of conflict, broken alliances, and global instability?
It's not a certainty, but it does suggest we're entering a period of heightened uncertainty and risk.
Yeah.
The old rules don't apply anymore.
And the future's kind of up in the air.
Exactly.
So what can we do as individuals in the face of all this? It feels like we're standing on the edge of a completely different world, and it's hard to know which way to turn.
That's a question a lot of people are asking. I think the first step is to acknowledge how complicated these challenges really are and resist those simple answers.
So embrace the nuance, resist those black and white narratives we see everywhere.
Exactly. We need to talk to each other, listen to different perspectives, and be open to changing our minds. It's also crucial to stay informed and hold our leaders accountable for their choices.
So it's about being more informed and recognizing that the choices we make as individuals and as a global community will determine what the future looks like.
That's it. The future isn't set in stone. We shape it through our actions and decisions.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And by having these deep dives, by exploring these scenarios, we're taking a step towards creating a future that's more informed, more just, and hopefully more sustainable.
Well said.
And on that note of cautious optimism, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another exploration of, well, whatever craziness the world throws at us next.
Until then, stay curious and keep asking the tough questions.